participate. This morning, we're looking at Psalm 3. And in terms of format of my teaching, I'm going to give a little context to the Psalm. I'll read it then in English with a translation that I've put together that's kind of more gender appropriate for our time. And then I'll analyze it a bit. Usually I leave 20 minutes I speak for 20 minutes and then have 10 minutes at the end for people to react. But if I can ask that you react this time with chat, because there's a juicy backstory to the Psalm, and that's what I'd like to do the last 10 minutes. And the backstory will focus in on why is Absalom chasing his father, seeking to kill King David. As you'll see, if we look at Psalm 3, that's the opening line. A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. Now, the story of David and Absalom is in the second book of Samuel, the fleeing, chapters 15 to 19. And that's, again, worthy of sharing what is going on between father and son, but that's the last 10 minutes. This psalm in the Talmud, at least in Brachot, is considered to be the first psalm, with Psalm 1 and 2 that we looked at the last 2 days as kind of introduction. That's in part because this psalm specifically has the ascription of a Psalm of David. And among the first 40 psalms, David's name is repeated. So a lot of people, if you ask them who wrote the Psalms, they would say, well, King David. And that's true in some cases, perhaps, but not in all. And even with this one, Mizmor LeDavid, a psalm for David, could either mean in his honor, presented to David, or, as many believe, written by David. And so this psalm, Psalm 3, is quite different than the first two psalms. Psalm 1, which was the description of Ashrei, what is a contented person, the importance of Torah as our preparedness against evil counsel. Psalm 2, the royal psalm about how it's a dangerous world out there, perspective of a king with enemies, and God will be our saving grace.
Oh, I see. That's their timeline. I get it. Okay, that's what they mean. A 5-year quarterly schedule.
Psalm 3. Okay, Eric, you have to mute everybody.
You know what's interesting? We used to do our timeline this way.
Rabbi, you haven't given me the permission to mute people, so you would have to make me a co-host.
See where it says year 1?
Okay, so excuse me 1 second. One of our participants is not muted. If I can ask everybody to mute.
Only starts on October 1st. That's right.
Mark Weiss, I believe it's coming from your microphone.
I got it.
But it sounds like Sandy Klein talking.
I got mute all. We're good now. I am progressing here.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Progressing here with my tech savvy. So let's begin. Here's the thing to know about this psalm. It's a short psalm. You'll see later some really long psalms. This one's only 9 verses. And here's the structure. The opening psalm for David is an introduction, and the very end is also kind of an envelope, is a introduction, is a closing. But verses 2 to 4, it's as if we're overhearing a conversation between the speaker, David, and God. And likewise, for verse 8, we're listening into that conversation. But the middle, verses 5 to 7, is we're now listening to the speaker talking to himself. All right, here we begin. A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. Adonai, how many are my tormentors? Many are they that rise up against me. Many who say of my life, there is no rescue through God, Selah. But you, Adonai, are a shield about me, my glory, who lifts up my head. With my voice, I cry out to Adonai, who answers me from the holy mountain, Selah. I lie down and I sleep. I awake, for Adonai has sustained me. I fear not for myriads of troops that have set themselves around me. Arise, Adonai, rescue me, my God, for you strike all my enemies upon the cheek. The teeth of the wicked you smash. To Adonai is rescue. Upon your blessing, Selah. So the first thing to acknowledge is this word Selah that appears 3 times. Robert Alter is one of the Bible scholars, a literature professor at Berkeley, who has written a translation of the entire Tanakh, entire Hebrew scripture, but he's also written a piece on Psalms. And he says of this word Selah that appears these 3 times, that it's choral or musical notation with no way of determining its meaning or origins, its etymology. Some classic biblical commentators like Ibn Ezra says it's like the word amen. The Targum, which is the translation into Aramaic, says that Selah means more specifically forever. But what's interesting, to return to Alter's comment, and it's also within rabbinic writings, that the word Selah is direction to the choral leader. And I begin with that to say, Psalms, like much poetry, was often put to music. And we'll see that more explicitly as we study our Psalms, that this will be to the leader of the Levites choir or the orchestra leader. And so these selahs are some kind of an indication of musical guidance, reminding us that the Psalms are meant to be sung to elucidate and elicit some of their message. This psalm, in contrast to Psalm 1 and 2, is deeply personal. The word mine is repeated over and over. And there's a context given in the beginning, which is that David is fleeing from his son Absalom. So one more comment in that regard. This event in David's life does not occur till much later in David's life. David will live to the age of 70. He will have ruled for 40 years as king. Classic biblical commentators put the event of David fleeing from Absalom when he's 65 years old, which is only to say that the Psalms, if they are and when they are written by David, are not chronological. This is much later in his life. And there will be Psalms later among the 150 that relate to events earlier in David's life. And yet, by this relating to a moment in David's life, there is profound sense of why he's writing it and this personal dimension. And so we overhear David describing a dire situation in verses 2 and 3. Adonai marabut sarai. Adonai, how many are my tormentors? Rabim kamim alai. Multitudes rise up against me. This word rabim will also begin the next verse, verse 3. Rabim meaning many. Rabim omrim linafshi. Many say of my life or of my soul. Ein Yeshua lo ve'elohim. There is no salvation from God. This word rabim, many, is in relation to foes, but it underscores the sense of feeling overwhelmed. Again, the beginning is he's only fleeing from Absalom, his son, but clearly Absalom has forces. And in this moment, David is feeling overwhelmed. And so this word is repeated. It will be repeated 4 times, that of Rabim, many, in the psalm, 4 times. And the other word that'll get repeated is the Yeshua, which is deliverance. That gets repeated 3 times. So we see that here in verse 3. There is no deliverance, those who mock him say, through God. Now, the word for God in verse 3, and this is, of course, the value of reading the Hebrew, the original, is different than in all the other verses. Here, the word is Elohim. Elohim is different than the Yud-He Vav-He, which is the other expressions for God in this psalm. Elohim is God as judge. It's also used elsewhere in the Bible for human judges. If you will, it's God's job description as an authority figure. In contrast to Yud-He Vav-He, which is the personal relationship with a caring being. And so all throughout, God's name will be repeated as Yud-He Vav-He, because David experiences God intimately, but his mockers, they refer to God as Elohim, the one who is this authority, the one who would rescue you. Another piece to focus on, and that is that the word nafshi in verse 3 is soul. Another wordplay is Rabim omrim lenafshi. Many say to my soul. They don't say to me, they say to my soul, which means they try to penetrate my essence. Nefesh is the spirit of God that's embodied in each of us. So my mockers, they're attacking even this notion of my own being present or holding God from within. It's more than my physical that they're speaking to. They are puncturing or trying to puncture my very essence. Now, verse 4. But you, Adonai, are a shield about me, my glory who lifts up my head. This is the only metaphor in this psalm, and it's referring to God as a shield. Again, David is going into battle against his enemies. God is the shield. That's the metaphor, his protector, my glory. But here is an interesting play. Merim Roshi, who lifts up my head. If you're going into battle, the shield is supposed to protect your head. It's supposed to protect your body. If you lift up your head above your shield, it means, you know, I'm okay. I really have the shield, but I don't need the shield. And that's kind of a pivotal verse. So it begins with David feeling tormented, remembering that God is the shield. And again in verse 4, it's va'ata, it's very personal. And you, as David addresses God directly, Yud-He Vav-He, that intimate name for God, Magain Ba'adi, is the shield around me. So again, such a personal expression that we're listening in to as David addresses God. And now we listen to David reflect inwardly. With my voice, I cry out to Adonai. And again, here's a play, right? The enemies, they use their voice to mock me, my faith. My voice I use to God I call. And from the holy mountain, v'ya'aneni, God answers me. And now verse 6, and again, it's so strange because in prayers, we often don't have the I. This is prayer as personal conversation. I lie down and I sleep. I awake because Yud He Vav He, God, sustains me. Now, so calm, is it that he's so calm, or the opposite, that he just needs to tune out? We have both of these possibilities, and that's again the power of poetry. Both might be simultaneously true. Rashi, the classic commentator, France, 1040 to 1105, he says that this going to sleep in this moment is out of despair, a retreat. Think of Jonah in the Bible, who goes to sleep in the belly of the whale. It's like, I can't take any more, I'm gonna tune out. The other possibility is another medieval French commentator, Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, and he says that this refers to the sleep of inner calm. Now that David is affirmed that God is his shield, all right, I can let go. Because going to sleep means letting go of control. Going to sleep means that you're unprotected from an enemy. Now that I've acknowledged that God is my shield, I can rest. And verse 7 emphasizes that. Lo ira, I will not fear from the myriad of troops that have set themselves around me. I must pause in this moment where we live with fear of an unseen virus that Rabbi Harold Kushner, in a book called Conquering Fear, says that the most repeated command in Tanakh, in Hebrew scripture, is you shall not fear. It's repeated throughout Psalms, and it's here too in verse 7. And now a shift with verse 8. Again, 5, 6, and 7 is David going through this process of transition from fear. And now we hear the conversation resume with God. Arise, God, rescue me. Again, that word of deliverance. Rescue me, Elohai, my God. For you strike my enemies upon the cheek, the teeth of the wicked you smash. This phrase is a bit of a response to verse 3. Remember, it was the tormentors who mocked with words David, God won't help you. Well, God, rise up and smack them in the face, punch them in the mouth, literally, right? Punch their cheek, the teeth of the wicked. They who speak ill of you, who seek to undermine my confidence in you, punch them in the mouth. So that creates a kind of closing of the psalm with the refrain at the end. To God, and again, it's the Yud He Vav He. One other play, in verse 8, you get Elohim, that word that I mentioned before, but rather than being the generic God, here it's my God. So it's not the Yud He Vav He in 8, it's again coming back to that earlier image, but it's the personalizing. The God who has power is my God. And now with verse 9, to Yud He Vav He is my rescue. This repetition of this is a psalm of deliverance. And these last words, Al Amcha Virchatecha Selah, upon your people is your blessing, is stepping away from the psalm. Now it could be the same voice, but some say it's a standard way of ending despair. The way you'd end a speech with God bless America after you've talked about all the challenges that we face. So this is kind of a national refrain. Upon your people, may there be your blessing. And in that sense, it's the listener who is responding, perhaps as well. It's formulaic, but brings together a psalm of rescue, a psalm of release from fear. In that sense, there is a challenge because we would need to pause, and I'm thinking about my sermon for Friday night. I'll probably talk about God's role in life and role in both enabling fear and responding to fear. But I'll bracket that larger psalm question of how we relate to this psalm individually. But I would leave it for each of you to reflect on, how does this psalm comfort you in this moment? To what degree, amidst uncertainty in which there's the foe of an illness, can we feel shielded? What gives us repose to sleep through the night and awaken renewed? That is at the center of this psalm with a specific historical context. So let me tell you the story. It's just too unfamiliar to many of us. I had to actually go back and reread it this morning because I wanted to be sure I got it right. It's about the falling out of a father and a son. And here's the story from the second book of Samuel. The story is that David had many wives, and that meant there were half-siblings amongst his children. And one of those half-siblings, Amnon, had an intense craving for a sister named Tamar. Tamar had a full brother, and that brother is Absalom. So Amnon is lovesick, unrequited love. And one of his advisors says, look, here's what you do. If you really love her so badly, trick her, have her be alone, and then seduce her. And then she'll be yours and you will have been able to overcome your yearning. And so Amnon goes to his father David and he says, Dad, I'm really sick. I need my sister Tamar to bring me some food, to make food for me. And so David orders for Tamar to help her brother, her half-brother. And she kneads dough in front of him in the description in the book of Samuel. And he, at a certain point, Absalom, reaches out and grabs her and says, I want you. And she says, that's not the way of our people. I can't just be taken now, but surely if you ask our dad, he will allow you to marry me. At which point, Amnon rapes her. And then, while they're still alone, he feels disgust for her. That's the actual language in the text. And he says, leave. And she's ashamed. And so he has an attendant take her out. And she's crushed. And she speaks to her brother, Absalom, and he says, he doesn't really answer. He's just very sad for her. And David hears about it, and it says he's upset. But David does not do anything about it. 2 years go by, and Absalom plans and succeeds with his forces in killing Amnon. So he murders his brother, who has violated his sister. And David is said to be very sad. And then it says he gets over mourning for Amnon, but yearns for Absalom, his beloved son, who at this point has fled because he's engaged in participation in the murder of Amnon. And from that point on, Absalom will try and succeed in incurring favor among the people of Israel as the heir to the throne, as the one who deserves to be king. And indeed, when David learns that Absalom is growing in popularity among the people of Israel and is amassing an army, David flees. The way the story will end is Absalom will be in hot pursuit. There's some intrigue in the middle with an advisor named Achitophel who guides Absalom. And Absalom on his horse will be caught in a tree by a branch as if he's caught. And then there'll be a discussion between the troops of David whether to cut him down or to kill him, and they kill him. And David mourns his son Absalom greatly. Now that's a very dramatic, sad story of a father and a son, of a daughter and a half-brother and a daughter and a father who didn't protect her. That's the complexity of David and the complexity of our Bible and the backdrop of complexity over this psalm, or at least as it's ascribed to this psalm. And that is, this psalm is written in a moment of torment for David where he loves his son Absalom. He's guilt-ridden also over having failed to protect his daughter. And his only saving grace, and this is throughout much of David's life, his source of comfort is his relationship with God, which is so deeply personal. It is my God. It is Yud-He Vav-He. And again, I'm left with why is this the opening of the Psalms? Psalm 3. And now this is just my making it up. Psalm 1 and 2 have their reasons as why they foreshadow the purpose of Psalms, that of the importance of Torah and the confidence in God for a king overcoming foes, knowing it's a dangerous world, that there is evil and that there is a derech, a way. But my sense of this psalm is this is the start in the most personal place in David's life. And to say that the goal of Psalms is to respond to our deepest conflict, our greatest inner torment, and to find God as a source of power, of overcoming our own inner doubts, our own inner pain, our own resiliency, that it is with a faith that we have a nephesh, a soul that is an extension of a loving creator, that we can overcome our deepest challenges. And so this is the first of the Psalms ascribed to David. It's probably in the most painful moment of David's life. And I surmise that's why it's the opening psalm, to say, no matter what pain you will confront, God will be there. And as we do traditionally in times of trouble, we turn to Psalms for comfort. Psalm 3 is the model of an extreme case of finding solace. And so with that, with it being a little different today, I see it's 10:30. I'm going to invite Helene to say Kaddish for her day. With study, there's the opportunity for Kaddish. Again, I want to say to each of you who've tuned in, thank you, thank you. You helped lift up my day by sharing Psalms, which is what we do traditionally as Jews in times of crisis. Next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, same time. We'll do in sequence Psalms 4, 5, and 6. Helene, Kaddish.
Turn off your mute so that you can say Amen and she can hear it.
Okay. Yikadav v'yikadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Yamad zibra kirutei machutei v'chayachon u'yomechon u'chayei b'kol beit Yisrael. V'agala u'bizman kari v'imeru amen.
Amen. Yehei Shmei
Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'et hadar, v'et haleh, v'et halal, shmei dekudasha barechu.
Riku.
Elam yinkol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, v'amiram v'ama v'imru amen.
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 Ama Rabba Min Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Shalom b'imrama, v'yaseh shalom, aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yakol Yoshvei Tevel v'imru amen.
Amen.
Amen. My